I think overall we can agree that week 1 of the SEC was solid. Good, not great. It's definitely nothing you're going to write home about. And on the primetime stage, it's one that you want to forget. And unfortunately, we as a conference now have to realize that Miami fans and Notre Dame fans and USC fans all believe that they're back and also have a legit shot of winning a national title. And that's because we didn't hold up our end of the bargain. But regardless, Alabama looked great. Georgia still looked like the team to beat. And Vandy, they anchored down. Everyone should have remembered that Auburn tried to warn us about Diego Pavia. He has arrived, and Pavia Power is sticking around in Nashville. But it's week 2, more matchups, more storylines, and also more questions leading up to what could be a very pivotal week in the conference. So what are the biggest things that we are looking for heading into Saturday's showcase? What's going on, SEC Unfiltered? It's Cole Thompson here. Make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification down below, and of course, hit subscribe. You've been here all off season. Now this is your #1 home for all things SEC. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Follow us on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. Go yell at me on Twitter, at Mr. Cole Thompson. And to keep up with the #1 source for all things SEC, make sure that you visit secunfiltered.com. This episode of SECU is brought to you by Roback. Use the promo code SECU for 20% off your first purchase. All joggers, polos, hoodies, shorts, much, much more. Look good, feel good this upcoming game day on Saturdays with Roback, promo code SECU. So we got some pretty marquee matchups going on this week. We have a couple of games that are definitely flying under the radar. I want to give a few honorable mentions before we dive into the major questions. Number 1, how do you respond after a loss? Texas A&M, Florida, LSU. You didn't do your job. You didn't hold up your end of the bargain. But one loss does not define your season. And the best part is none of them were conference wins or conference losses. So you still technically are sitting undefeated in the games that matter most to send you to Atlanta. How do you respond? If you're Joe Sloan, how do you open up the playbook? You have a wide receiver that looks to be the next future day 1 selection in Kyron Lacey, and you don't target him at all in the second half. How do you get him involved? How do you get Xavier Thomas involved? How do you get your tight end play involved, especially with a guy like Mason Taylor? How do you get CJ Daniels involved? The run game up tempo against Nichols. How do you do that? Because your defense did its job. How do you build? Texas A&M, wipe the slate clean with Connor Wigman. Last week was last week. This week is this week. It's McNeese. Your defense is going to be sound. You're going to play extremely well against the Cowboys. But what do you think of this offense? This is one of those weeks where you have to finite the little details to be able to separate yourself when it comes to the next matchup. Because Colin Klein's offense is intricate. We know they like to use the tight ends. We know how they like to use very much an option feel. What is the best case scenario with working with Connor Wigman? How do you get the tight ends involved? How do you see a separation at wide receiver? And how do you make sure that your run game is still fundamentally sound? And if you're Florida, we don't know the status of Graham Mertz. We don't know what's going to happen with this offensive line. We don't know what you're going to have moving forward with your wide receivers or really your depth at running back. How do you separate that? And how does DJ Lagway look? This is the #1 quarterback in the nation. It's a big reason why I think Billy is going to get a little bit more of a leniency period. How does he look against Stanford? And the reason why you want to set the tone in these games is because you want to get back to your brand of football. It's a tune-up game because the next week you will be facing tougher competition. If you're LSU, you get to go travel to an early kick at Willie B, take on South Carolina. They're not going to be as bad as they looked in week 1. And if you're Texas A&M or Florida, you get to go ahead and have bragging rights on why you're not looking like the worst team in the SEC. So it's a set-up game moving into week 2. Pavia Power. Guys, Diego Pavia has arrived. Auburn tried to warn you about this. I tried to tell you that this was a guy that you have to respect in the SEC because that relationship with Tim Beck, and he balled out. He's the big reason why the Commodores are sitting at 1-0 over a team that still technically has a shot to make it to Charlotte and be the ACC representative in the college football playoff. Nobody's expecting you to lose to Alcorn State. I thought at the beginning of the year you were going to lose to Alcorn State. But now the question is, what more can we see from Pavia Power? And by the way, I'm going to trademark that until he gets on the show and gives us an actual nickname. I'm working on getting him on the show. So don't worry, we're going to have that conversation with number 2, who is #1 quarterback in my heart. I want to see more consistency. I want to see this offense take that next step. If you do, are we actually talking about Vanderbilt being something promising? Having Clark Lee call defensive plays was a really smart move. but there's more left in the process. Alabama's passing attack. You didn't see a lot of it against Western Kentucky. I thought you would. Only Jalen Miller was 7 and 9. I think it was 18 total passes in the game. You saw what Ryan Williams can do. You saw a little bit of what Kobe Prentice can do. You saw a little bit of what you're going to get from Jeremy Bernard. Do you continue to see that? Do you get to see a Kendrick Law take that next step forward? Because South Florida, as good as they got this offseason, and they did a really nice job fixing their secondary in the transfer portal, still was one of the worst pass defenses in the country last year underneath Alex Golesh. And I'm not saying that that's going to be a problem for the Bulls. I'm not saying that that's going to be a reason why Alabama is going to massacre them. I think it's actually pretty close in the first half, if I'm being completely transparent. But I want to see this passing attack take that next step forward. How does Kobe Prentice look? How does Kendrick Law look? How does Ryan Williams at 17 years old kind of fit into this offense? Is he the alpha already, or is he more so a secondary player? And then, of course, Jeremy Bernard, that's a guy that I believe is going to have a big-time day. Oklahoma on third down, plain and simple, they struggled on that aspect in the games, but they did make up for it on fourth down, 3 of 3. And when you get 6 turnovers in a game, you're walking away with a dub. I don't care if it's a 3-point victory or a 50-point victory. 6 turnovers is 6 turnovers. Jackson Arnold, I think, is the right guy. I think that when you look at those turnovers that you're hearing about in practice, leave them on a Monday afternoon, not on a Saturday morning. How do you respond against a Cougars team, a Houston team that you saw last year in the Big 12, kind of regress even more? Willie Fritz, I think, is the long-term right answer, but that doesn't mean he is the right answer this year. And when you lose to UNLV, you already feel like you're waving the white flag on this year. Can you be better on third down? Can you throw with more anticipation, connecting with your targets? Can you get the tight end play more involved? Is Nick Anderson going to play in this game? Little things like that, I think, do truly matter. And lastly, Brady Cook deep ball. Marquise Johnson dropped 2 passes. Brady Cook also missed 2 passes. Those are 20-plus yard plays that could separate you as a legit contender in the SEC. And I just want to see it connect, because I truly believe that this is an offense that was drastically slept on because we weren't paying attention to the skill players. They got better on the offensive line. You saw what that unit looked like, a starting 5 that was capable of opening up avenues, increases for the run game, giving Brady, let him cook, time to throw. Let's see that deep ball connect this week against the Buffalo Bulls. Now, can Texas establish the run to set up the pass? Game in Ann Arbor, the big house. Gus Johnson on the call. We know what he's going to do. We also know that this is a run game that can be very potent. A lot of people last week were wondering, what was Texas going to look like without CJ Baxter? Can Jaden Blue be the right guy? He can. But so can Jarrett Gibson. So can Trey Wisner. They both looked really promising in their roles as the secondary pieces. And of course, now you feel really good about having a bigger back to move the sticks on third and short. That's a big area of weakness last year for Texas. How do you get it this year? I said last week that Torrey Horton, I think, is going to be the best player at wide receiver Texas sees all season. I believe that you will not see a better interior defensive line than what you're going to see at Michigan. And Michigan did look sluggish at times, especially against a Fresno State team that probably hung around a lot longer than you thought. But they still have that same aura and energy that won them a national title a year ago. And by the way, it's headlined by their defensive line. Josiah Stewart, Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham. You're not going to face a better trio this season until at least you face off against the Georgia Bulldogs. And so if you can establish the run, if you can pick up those short yard situations, if you can move the sticks to put you in a good third down position, if you can find ways to open up avenues to get your offense humming, you got wide receivers that can work. I know that there are some people who are frustrated that I said that you have B-plus receivers. I also said that they could be A-plus receivers after this game. I want to see someone take that next step forward. Will Johnson's the best cornerback you will see all year. It's not until SEC play, until you face this team. No, that is the best cornerback in college football, and that is the best cornerback you will see all year if you are a Texas fan. He can only cover one player. Like how water covers 70% of the earth, Will Johnson can only cover one dude. So whether it's Matthew Golden, whether it's Silas Bolden, whether it's Isaiah Bond, whether it's Jonte Let Him Cook, whether it's Ryan Wingo, one guy is going to be out of the play. 4 others will have room to gallop. And that's not including across the middle of the field with tight end play, like Gunnar Helm, like Amari Niblack, like Juan Davis. You set up the run, you force the hand at the best strength of Michigan to extend the pass. And I don't worry about what you're going to see in a guy like Quinn Ewers. He's played in big games like this. Marched on in last year to Bryant-Denny Stadium and kicked Nick Saban's keister. Marched on into Arlington, set a Big 12 record against Oklahoma State. Did all the things that you want as not just a program-defining quarterback, but also a Heisman one. And if you win this game, it's very iridescent to what we saw last year when they left Tuscaloosa. That was the calling card. That was the first pitch. That was the signal. Texas has arrived. Best look out. You're going to get our best punch every single Saturday. And I can tell you what, the way that Texas played against Colorado State, that looks like a team that can win an SEC title. They do the same type of thing against Michigan, and it's not going to happen with the score, but it could happen with the sheer dominance, the ability to keep drives and the momentum moving in the right direction. That, to me, is where you look at a team like Texas and say, they 100% college football playoff contender. Let's talk about Tennessee. Tennessee fans, I know that I said that I believe in NC State. Here's the thing. I still do. I believe that there is a fine line of what we saw on Saturday from both spectrums. Number one, I do believe Nico Iamaleava is 100% a Heisman contender. And that's it right now. And that's going to be it all the way throughout the rest of the season. And I believe that if he wins in this game, you're going to watch as the entire college football world puts him on the pedestal, a pedestal that he has earned. They have the weapons. I also believe that the version of what you saw of NC State is not going to be the version of what you will see of NC State in this game. You have to realize they lost their starting linebacker, Caden Fordham, on the opening drive. That's the guy with the green dot. For those of you that don't know, linebackers, there's a guy on the field that is the general. He gets the play calls from the defense coordinator. He took over for Peyton Wilson, who was the top linebacker in the country last year. You lose him on the opening drive. I'm not saying that as an excuse for the Wolfpack. I'm not saying that that's an excuse to look that horrendous against an FCS program for 3 quarters. I'm not saying that that's a reason to think that they're going to be bad. What I'm saying is sometimes you get those week 1 kinks out of the way and then you expand. So do you feel comfortable, if you're Nico, expanding plays? You didn't play the second half. I get it. I get it, Tennessee fans. I know what you're going to say in the comment section. But I also know you got a guy that can easily make iridescent throws and rookie mistakes because it's a different atmosphere. You're not playing at Rocky Top. You're not playing in Raleigh. You're playing in Charlotte. And yes, Volunteer Country travels extremely well. Vol's fan base is one of the best in college football. I'll die on that take as long as I live. But it is going to be different. So what happens if the defense gives you a crease and you feel like that you have a small window, but again, a defensive back at the last second jumps the route on a pass intended for Dante Thornton, or a pass intended for Chris Brassel, or a pass intended for Holden Stays, the tight end. And now it's a turnover. How do you respond to that? Playing against a team like Chattanooga was a great, serviceable moment to set a standard moving forward for this offense. But playing a team like NC State, a team that I do believe is going to be better than advertised, is setting a standard on what to expect when you go against SEC competition. And if you march into an atmosphere like Charlotte, neutral site, where there will be fans traveling up the road from Raleigh, where it will feel like a very neutral game, that's going to play well in your favor when you have to travel to Norman to take on a team like Oklahoma, when you have to travel to face off against a team like Georgia, when potentially you go to Atlanta for an SEC title. You have the talent. I get it. James Pierce played like 10 snaps in that game. I get it. Your secondary looks really good. You have, in my opinion, the most slept on running back room, headlined by Dylan Sampson, and the most slept on linebacker room in the SEC. But everything starts and ends with Nico. Does Nico feel comfortable if he has to run and tuck the football? Does Nico feel comfortable if he doesn't get that deep shot, but he has to attack the middle of the field? Do you take away that deep shot if you're NC State? Do you force Nico to kind of have to move outside the pocket and feel the pressure for the first time? Just little things like that. Do you have to open the playbook? Because I think in the perfect world for Josh Heupel, he would love nothing more than to walk out of Charlotte feeling comfortable going into SEC play, knowing that there's still 50 pages left of that book that have not been unveiled. And he won't have to unveil it until he takes on his former team that has a little bit of hard memories with. Let's talk about next, Payton Thorne. Was it a fluke? Alabama A&M said 10-minute quarters and a running clock in the second half. You do the math about what type of performance you saw down at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Cal's not going to do that. Cal, I don't think, is a team that you have to really worry about. Jaden Ott's overall status for this game is going to be really big. But Payton Thorne looked night and day difference. How funny is it that a year after spending all offseason learning the ins and outs of an offense and you actually get to have a spring practice, you look better? So did the weaponry. The arsenal and the supporting cast of what Thorne has is second to none. This, and I know it's week one, and I know overreactions are a big deal, but I'm going to go out here and say it. This is the best cast of characters that Auburn has had in a hot minute and likely this decade. Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, Rivaldo Fairweather, who really did not get involved in that game. He is a freaking cyborg. You had, of course, Robert Lewis dealing with a hamstring injury in that performance. Probably going to be back for this game. Keandre Lambert-Smith, Perry Thompson, Sam Jackson, Caleb Burton. I mean, there's guys that I haven't even mentioned because I don't have to. That's the best version of what you're going to see on the Plains in decades. It's better than what Cam Newton had to work with when he won a Heisman Trophy. It's better than what Nick Marshall had to work with when he led his team to a national title appearance in 2013. It's better than all that. But it starts and ends with your quarterback. And so now you're facing off against a better defense. Now you're facing off against a more stable secondary. Now you're facing off against a better pass rush. Do you deliver? You have the mobility. I think that we all saw that in last week's game. He can boot, scoot, boogie like Rickson Dunn. But does he have the aura? Can he push down the football? When the pressure is in his face, can he deliver that same strike to a Cam Coleman, to a Perry Thompson, to a Keandre Lambert-Smith, to a Malcolm Simmons? Can you get that gusto moving? Can you win on third down? Because right now, Auburn is a very big sleeper. You look at the way that these Tigers played, you don't want to face them on a Saturday if that's the version you're going to get. And again, it's Alabama A&M, a running clock, waving the white flag before halftime's even over, kind of sets a tone about what you're going to see. But still, this is a team that I think showed you a new gear, showed you something that you've been waiting to see in the Hugh Freeze era. And more importantly, this is going to be sustainable. This is not going away anytime soon. You may lose Payton Thorne, but you're not losing this aura or energy, and certainly none of these recruits. And now more recruits are actually paying attention to you because they see a vision that has Auburn actually winning more than just 9 games. That's no longer the standard down at Auburn, Alabama. The standard at Toomer's Corner is to see 10-plus wins, make it to a college football playoff, and probably go deeper than expected. That's going to be the new set tone. But it starts this year by winning those games. Last year out when you went down to the West Coast, Best Coast, it was a dogfight. It shouldn't be a dogfight, but it could if you don't get the version of Payton Thorne that we saw on Saturday in a moment to where a lot of us, yours truly even, had to kind of eat crow and say, oh yeah, that's what an offseason looks like. How about Brock Vandagriff? So many of you realize that that game against Kentucky, Southern Miss, was basically canceled in the second half. I think that they played like 5 minutes and then they said, nope, we're done. Lightning delays. We're not going to deal with this. Vandagriff was good. Vandagriff was really, really good. He wasn't great. I'm just going to go out there and say it. I think Kentucky has a very solid roster. I think Kentucky has the most slept on wide receiver core in the country. I've been on record with that. I love Dane Key. I love Barian Brown. The addition of Jamori Macklin. Oh, look, he led the team in receiving yards and averaged 33 per play. It's going to be special. Their defense looks so much better. I thought their offensive line looked above average. Brock Vandagriff threw an interception. He probably should have thrown another pick six. Do you look better? The game's at home against South Carolina, and there's bad blood between these two squads. And it starts at the top and trickles all the way down. You, as Kentucky, have probably been the better team over the last 2 years. You, as Kentucky, are 0-2 against Shane Beamer. That's the story. That's just the bottom line. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. But you feel like that you have the quarterback. You feel like that you have the offensive play calling. You may not have Chip Trayanum, but the ground game was still pretty potent. You averaged 6.2 yards per play. You have the aura to extend your season. Honestly, will it shock you if Kentucky, as we've seen, as history loves to repeat itself, fighting in November to be that 10-win roster that pushes itself into the playoff conversation? And if they're not in the playoff conversation, they sure as hell will make sure someone isn't. But you got to start it this week. Winning against opponents that you should is the difference between teams that belong in the college football playoff conversation and teams that just feel like a fun story. I want to believe that Brock Vandagriff will look better. I want to believe that Brock Vandagriff having another season having another game underneath his belt will progress. I want to see these wide receivers take that next step forward. I want to see how this offensive line looks. I want to see him be able to work in the middle of the field. I want to see him take that next step in his progression. I think that him and Bush Hamdan are on the same page. I believe that he can be similar to what we saw out in Eugene, Oregon the last 2 years of Bo Nix, now in Lexington. And if you have a Bo Nix clone, the version that you watch underneath Will Stein running your show, guys, I hate to say it, but Kentucky's a football school at that point, and they belong in that conversation. But it starts this week beating an opponent that you feel that you should have an advantage of. 9.5 point is the line. Vegas even thinks that you should be coming out on top. And speaking of South Carolina, let's flip the switch. Can their offense match their defense? I'm going to say something that a lot of people probably don't want to hear. Old Dominion can hang around with teams. They've shown it in the past. Jason Henderson should be a D1 FBS high-paid middle linebacker somewhere. He should. But instead, he wanted to stick around with ODU and be a part of a big fish in a small pond. They can hold their own. And maybe this is South Carolina, similar to how we talk about Michigan right now. Michigan with Davis Warren, they decide to start him. Alex Orji comes on in. He delivers a pass. Then you see the defense kind of take the step in the second half. Will Johnson decides to go ahead and call things out. He says, I'm going to ice the game. Maybe that's South Carolina. But their defense was good. You can go ahead and sugarcoat it as much as you want. 19 points to an Old Dominion team is probably going to be enough for you to feel confident going into SEC play. Debo Williams looked really good. DeAndre Jules looked really good. Dylan Stewart looked awesome. He's the sole reason why you won that football game. Got set up inside the red zone with the forced fumble. Tonka Hemingway looked really good. Jalen Kilgore looked really good. Nick Eman I knew I was going to get someone to call me out on that one, so I'm making sure I pronounce it right. He looked great. Your offense didn't. I still have questions when it comes to your offensive line. I still have questions when it comes to your play calling. I still have questions when it comes to your wide receivers. Your tight ends were anemic at times. Can you step up? And again, this is a game where history, if it repeats itself, is going to bode well for the long term in Kentucky, but in the short term, South Carolina. And if you're South Carolina, you should feel confident going into this game because you have a quarterback that can work. Lenore Sellers wasn't perfect. His arm accuracy was abysmal at best, but there's enough to like about what he put on film to where you can say, you start getting the ball rolling, it's going to finally hit the target and it's going to be a strike. That's what you have. And think of it as a bowling alley and you're just trying to roll and hit the pins. You're not trying to go for the overkill. You're not trying to go for the finesse shot. You're trying to hit 300. Just easy breezy. In the great words of Chubb Peterson, loosey-goosey, baby. That's all you got to do. It's all in the hips. It's all in the hips. It's all in the motion. Can the offense match the defense? Last one for you. Actually, I got two more for you real fast. They're both against Big 12 teams. Arkansas. Is that Taylen Green against last? Again, it's Arkansas Pine Bluff. Again, it's in Little Rock. Again, you're not going to see 70-0 outlooks. That is a performance where, unfortunately, the oversaturated overreactions take control. And I have to reel you back in and let you know Arkansas Pine Bluff is not Oklahoma State. And Oklahoma State is gung-ho about making the college football playoff. Oklahoma State truly believes that they have a shot this year to be one of the best teams and the new standard of the Big 12. And the standard of the Big 12 is getting to the college football playoff and winning a game, getting a first-round bye. That's the standard. Oklahoma State can do that. Oklahoma State did not look perfect, but they were able to get an early pick 6 in the game. They were able to separate themselves from South Dakota State. They have some weapons. They have a solid defense. If you're Taylen Green, can you make this last? If you're Jaquindon Jackson, can you make this last? Those were two of the biggest players that I walked away more impressed with, and honestly was a bit ashamed at my predictions on how I felt about Arkansas. But I also had Arkansas losing this game. Do I believe that Arkansas can win this game? Absolutely. Do I believe that what I saw in the version of a Bobby Petrino-led offense by Taylen Green can work? Absolutely. Do I believe that there is a lot to like about the future of Arkansas football with this brand of offense? Absolutely. But I got to see it. You're not facing off against competition where Taylen Green looks like he's playing Pop Warner football in a backyard at a barbecue. I don't need to see that. What I need to see is the progression, the timeliness, the accuracy, the consistency. I want to see him have that deep shot down the field. You got to realize he only threw 23 passes. Yeah, he also ran for 68 yards and 2 tutties. You're not going to probably do that against the Cowboys defense. The Pokes, and by the way, Boone Pickens Stadium, it is a cathedral of chaos. People I have spoken to around the Big 12, people I have spoken to in the SEC, people I've spoken to in just the coaching community have all told me one of the biggest atmospheres that does not get enough respect is Boone Pickens Stadium. So that atmosphere is going to play a major dividend in favor of the Pokes on Saturday. Can you answer the call? And if so, how does this traject when you start conference play? Because this is the first test before you have another test in 2 weeks when you take on Auburn. Lastly, Arizona State's performance against Wyoming was awesome. I mean, honestly, I really don't have much to say. I went back and I watched most of the game. I came away impressed in the very opening drive. Pick 6 to start it, and that was the standard. Sam Levitt looked awesome. Your running back room was really, really good. Cam Scatteraboo looked really, really good on the ground. Can you match the tempo of your Mississippi State? In my opinion, actually, can you control the time of possession if you're Mississippi State? Can you run the football? Blake Shapen, I thought, was the best addition to this team. I thought that when you look at quarterback, head coaching combos, these two see eye to eye. They fit like a glove. They work really well together with Jeff Levy. I think that the way that you want to run this vertical passing, up-tempo rushing, have the ability to set up the run with the pass is going to work extremely well in Shapen's favor. It's why he led the team in rushing yards last week. But it's going to be a night game in Tempe. On top of that, it's going to be over 100 degrees at kickoff. On top of that, you got to be able to establish a run. Because I think in this game, what it's really going to come down to are two teams trending in the right direction underneath young up-and-coming coaches, offensive masterminds that know how to punch it into the end zone. Kenny Dillingham is no slouch. Comes from the Mike Norvell tree. Last season with Dan Lanning, or 2 seasons ago with Dan Lanning, got the Ducks all the way to a 10-win campaign. Probably would have been a reason why Bo Nix was still in the Heisman race last year. Probably. Can you do that and set a standard against him? Because if you're Jeff Lebby, the one thing that we know is that they love to run the football. Do you feel like you can run the football against a Sun Devils defense? A very underrated Sun Devils defense. They looked phenomenal. Their defense coordinator that they hired this offseason was a great addition to the squad. Can you match the tempo? There's a line in Deadpool that says, your crazy matches my crazy. Well, both of these offensive-minded coaches are mad scientists that are conducting personnel looks that are going to give fits in the SEC and in the Big 12, respectively. Kenny Levy's crazy and his consistency match Dillingham's crazy and his consistency to where we are talking about SEC After Dark. And by the way, if you haven't stayed awake for their game in the SEC after midnight, this is the one I highly recommend. It's going to be enjoyable. And more importantly, it's going to be a game that I think that we're going to be talking about on Sunday Fun Day when we get the live show early before NFL Week 1. But let me know in the comment section down below, what questions do you have going into Week 2? Who are some players that you're looking out for? What do you think is the difference in your game? What is the X factor? Make sure that you like, rate, review, subscribe. Follow me on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Mr. Cole Thompson. Follow us on social media at SEC Unfiltered. Download the podcast version of the show. And to keep up with all of our great content, make sure that you visit secunfiltered.com. I'm Cole Thompson. Until next time, SEC Nation, later.